Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. A thumbs up would be great just to verify that you can actually. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Sanazo. Thank you, Elaine and Peter. And thank you to all of you for joining us for I think the session on the research integrity and ethics session on the research data management. We are joined by our colleagues from IT services, the Research Data Management Advisory Group, who will present to us the principles and best practices for responsible data management while we do our research. So today, as part of our speakers, we have Dr. Um, there she is, Dr. Sarita Groenewald. We have Mathilda Kruger. We have Mr. Babiso Chesi is online, who is also part of the research data management team. I'm not sure if he's presenting today, but he is here for any questions. We have Peter Lowe, and I think we have Miss Millie van Wey. Colleagues, I'm not sure who is presenting first, but can we check whether you can share your slide? Thank you, Sarita. You just need to put it in presenter mode, and then I'll silence myself and you can start the presentation.
Okay, there we go. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, and there we go.
And
Because
there we go. The slides are in presenter mode.
fantastic, thank you. I'm sitting in a guest house in Greyton, and it's raining outside, so I'm in a
Oh,
bit of a
lovely.
out of my normal space. So I hope everything goes well. Here we go. Okay, thank you so much, Clarissa, for the introduction. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about managing research data. And we're going to have four co-presenters today. I will start the presentation with an introduction to the Research Data Management Regulation and point out some roles and responsibilities, and then the research data management that must be handled throughout the research project lifecycle. And then I will also mention some tools and resources that have been developed to assist researchers in their research data management activities. I'm representing the Division for Research Development today, and our next presenter will then be Fabisu from the Library and Information Service, who will talk a little bit more about external funder requirements, data management planning, which is a requirement, and data acquisition management, and then some ethical and legal requirements. And then Hilda Krier and Peter Lau from IT will end off the discussion with some the discussion about the Research ICT Commons and Research ICT Service Desk. And we all represent the support divisions, research support divisions of the university. And we are also working together to assist researchers to reach their data management goals. So I just wanted to point that out. So we're all working together, and will also be available, as you'll see in my presentation, to support researchers in the activities that are required. So we're starting off with a definition of research data management as we have it in our current research data management regulation. And it points to the planning for the way in which research data will be managed during and after the research process, and controlling the collection, processing, analysis, sharing, dissemination, curation, and the reuse of research data. Research data management is a core principle of good research practice and scientific integrity, and it is the university acknowledges that the research data is a valuable asset and contribute to the knowledge economy, and therefore needs to be managed, protected, and curated in the appropriate manner. This definition and other definitions associated with research data management can be found in the Research Data Management Regulation. So we often get the question, why do we need this regulation? Firstly, it's to enable compliance. There are several legal obligations, and that includes national and international legislations that manages the personal information, and we've got the POPIA, which is the South African legislation, and we've got the General Data Protection Regulation, that's the European Union personal information legislation, and there are also others. So we need to comply with these, and these are also included in our regulation. We also have ethical responsibilities. We have to protect our research subjects or research participants, and we must make sure of scientific validity and integrity, informed consent, protection of privacy, etc. Then we also have contractual requirements, and we have external funder requirements. There's intellectual property, sharing of data, data retention, etc., etc. And most research funders nowadays expect the universities to have an institutional research data management policy in place, and they will also require the submission of a detailed due diligence questionnaire before they even consider a project. So the research data management regulation and the support divisions can assist researchers to make sure that they will be able to submit those questionnaires that come in from external funders. Then we also have our own institutional requirements. We have a whole series of policies and regulations, and these are also included in the last section of the research data management regulation, with nice links so that people can access them easily. So secondly, we need the regulation to provide a foundation to define the principles of research data management governance at the university, and then of course the protection of research participants. It also provides a framework to define the responsibilities of all members at the university in this research data management process, and I will talk a little bit more about this later. It also guides the researchers and students in best practices of research data management. And there are several tools that have been developed to help this. So these will include data security, data integrity, FAIR principles, preservation of data, etc. So the regulation is part of the Stellenbosch University Research Governance Framework and must be read in conjunction with these policies. So there are several policies that we refer to in the regulation. And as I said before, there's also a list in the last section where people can access these relevant regulations and policies. So the regulation, the RDM regulation, was approved by Senate in 2020, and we started implementing it on campus in 2021. There was a quick review in 2023, and this the revised version of the regulation was approved by Senate in November 2023. We had to make some changes in the initial document because the university introduced the information classification and the information curatorship regulations. There were some legislations that were bills in 2020 when the initial regulation was drafted, and these were in the meantime promulgated as acts, so we had to change the details there. The POPIA regulator was appointed. And then we also had to include the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of the USA, because that also refers to the personal information of people that are included in clinical trials, for example. So we also made some improvements. We improved the sections relating to contractual matters. The terminology was updated to be aligned with the international terminology, and we improved links to improve the accessibility to external documents. Then we also implemented some lessons that we learned over the last or the first couple of years of implementation, and we revised the provisions accordingly. And then we also included storage options that are prioritized by the university. So these were the changes that were made. So when we look at the roles and responsibilities of people at the university in the research data management activities, we have to look at the model that describes and identifies the steps to be taken at the different stages of the research cycle. And that cycle is called the research data life cycle. It starts with data management planning. The second phase or stage is data collection, then data processing and analysis, 4 will be data sharing and dissemination, and then reuse, and then the cycle starts again. Data curation takes place throughout the entire life cycle, and that will include the maintenance, preservation, and adding value to the digital research data throughout the process. The roles and responsibilities of researchers and research support divisions are included in section 14.1 of the regulation. And the range of skills and knowledge needed to deliver the research data management services is dictated by the individual phases of the research project lifecycle that we divide into 3 sections for the purpose of this presentation. So we've got a pre-award stage or phase. That will be the planning of the project and proposal development, and then during the project, the execution of the project plan, and then the third phase will be post-project after the project has been finalized. So firstly, it's important to note that Stellenbosch University is still the legal entity and the legal owner of the research data, but it will be impractical for the university to manage all research data. So the principal investigator is automatically assigned as the steward of the data and the materials and the other research documentation. And the principal investigator will be responsible for all aspects of data management during the project. But yeah, as I said, the Stellenbosch University is the legal owner of the data. Then the core ethical principles apply to all research types. So it's not only linked to medical research or research where research participants are involved. So that was 2 important points that came out in some of the questions in our previous sessions. So let's look at the first phase of the project. Will always be the project planning. We will use good scientific practice and scientific integrity to start our project work plan and pack out our time schedules. We will also have a risk assessment. And then we must look at our data management planning, because for every research project at the university, there must be a data management plan submitted. And because we have to include our project budget into our funding proposal, it's important to consider these data management activities from the start so that these things can be included in the project budget as well. And researchers can also get assistance with costing of specific data management activities. So if you are looking at your data management planning, the Library and Information Services, LIS, will be able to assist with the data management plan and using the new software that we have in place for that, the FAIR Wizard. And we have the questions that you will need to answer there is: what type of data are you going to collect? How will the active data be stored? What type of metadata standards will be used? Do you need long-term archiving? And what type of curation you will do? And then will the data be restricted? Will the data be licensed for reuse, for example? Some IP strategy, is that in place? And then data ownership and access, and the Division for Research Development can help with that. If you have to look at the ICT infrastructure that you're going to use, IT can help researchers to make sure that they use the correct hardware, software, and online tools. They can also assist with data storage requirements and then costing and data security, and of course, big data management as well. If you are going to collect, process, or reuse personal information, information governance has developed a personal information impact assessment that must be done to see what the risk is associated with the data that you're going to be handling during the research project. And you will need to apply for Research Ethics Committee approval. The ethics approval obviously goes through the Division for Research Development. And if you need to plan personal information de-identification, encryption, or the secure storage of files, IT will be able to help researchers with that. So in the end, you'll need ethics approval and need to get informed consent from your human participants if you're going to, before you start your project. Then if there will be any data transferred or shared between parties during or after the project, the Division for Research Development can help with data transfer agreements. They can also help with the funding agreement, obviously, and as I said before, the due diligence questionnaires as well. So things to consider here will also be the funder policy requirements and external funding data management plan templates that may be required, and they can assist with that. The head of department will be responsible for governance and oversight of research data management in the department, compliance with the RDM regulation, and departmental standards and procedures and professional frameworks and standards, maybe a discipline-specific metadata standard or whatever the case may be. They will be able to assist researchers with that. So during the second phase, execution of the work according to the project plan, there's going to be data collection, which will also be the responsibility of the principal investigator. Here, the experiments will be done, the observations will be made, and the quality standards will be applied according to the project work plan that came from the planning phase. And then in the end, you'll have active data captured and your metadata. IT will be able to help researchers with the required software, maybe for different surveys that must be done. There's a wonderful RedCap training online available and a lot of assistance and support, access control of data, safeguarding, etc., metadata standards. We already talked about that. And then some file naming conventions and version control of files, different rules of backups and how that should be handled. Library information services can help with that. Then in the third phase, you're going to do data processing and analysis. We need to, in the end, get the processed data as a result and prepare the data for the research outputs, maybe a publication or presentation or a thesis. And the Library Information Service will be able to help researchers to interpret the data and the different statistics and mathematics that will be needed there. And then visualization of the data can also be, they also can also get assistance from the Library Information System, services. Publication and citation of research findings will be at the end of the project, and this is where the data will be shared or disseminated. It can be peer-to-peer transmission or publication, and it's important to remember that there might be a data transfer agreement required at this stage, and this is where the Division for Research Development Contracts Office will be able to assist researchers. And then the data can be published in Sun Scholar Data Repository, or it can be published as a supplementary data publication that's supplementary to a published journal article, or it can be deposited in a third-party digital data repository. All of these can be linked back to the Sun Scholar Data Repository of the university, and Library Information Service will manage the Sun Scholar Data Repository and will assist researchers to publish this data according to the requirements that they chose. Then the data reuse will or may include secondary data collection, and then the cycle will begin again. So it's important if you're going to use secondary data to make sure that you if there's research ethics committee approval required, that you do that. And then the citation of data is always important. And that's why we make sure that all publications will have a unique data availability statement and that they are cited, that the person that created the data or published the data will be cited there. Digital curation, as I said, takes place throughout the entire process, and these are value-added activities and features that make the digital content meaningful or useful and ensure long-term data readability. The Library Information Service will assist researchers with that as well. So apart from all the policies and regulations that form part of the research data management framework of the university that are also included in the regulation, there are several platforms and tools that are either already available or are in preparation, and the next two slides will show these with links. These include researcher relevant documentation, there's guidance, and there's even a research data management adventure game that was developed by one of our colleagues and a collaborator. And it's all part of the data management support services. So links to these tools have been included, and we also have an active service desk that is specifically for research data management questions, and Hilda will tell you more about that. But I'm going to say goodbye now and hand over to Kabisu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarita. I'm going to share my screen now. Am I audible, Clarissa?
Yes, you are, Klavi. So, and you just need to put your slides in presenter mode, and then you're good to go.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Sarita. I'm going to continue from where Sarita left off, but I might touch on some of the things she mentioned on her previous slides. I will start looking at the external funder requirements because these are some of the things that researchers need to consider when they start with their research projects. It's important to take note that when we talk about the external funders, they may have their own requirements, and these requirements may clash with the university requirements. But if there is a clash where a researcher has received a funding, external funder requirements will always take priority and will supersede the university requirements. And also, when we are talking about the funder requirements and what impact do they have on the data management plan, there are some instances where external funder requirements can have influence on the DMP template that the researcher can use. For an example, if ever a researcher has been funded, the funder may require the researcher to use their own DMP template. And if that is the case, the SU RDM regulation takes this into consideration, and it acknowledges that where a funder have a DMP template, the researcher can use the funder template as per requirement in developing their data management plan. Currently, at the moment, at Stellenbosch University, we do not have our own dedicated DMP template. And our researchers are directed to third-party platforms like your DMP Online. But we have been working, as you can see here on the slide that I've shared with you guys, there are two ways of going about constructing a data management plan. But we as Stellenbosch University are planning to launch a new DMP template that is dedicated to SU researchers. And we are planning to launch this template on the 17th of April. However, at the present moment, the researchers can continue to use the third-party platforms. I would like to highlight that the RDM regulation stipulates that researchers are required to review their data management plan at least twice a year. If you need assistance on this, you are more than welcome to contact us at the library. I have my fellow colleague Sizwe that can also assist. I can also assist on this matter. Where it comes to data acquisition and management, SU requires that if personal information will be collected by the researchers, they are encouraged to do a privacy impact assessment, and researchers must ensure that the data is stored appropriately and protected all the time. Where data ownership is concerned, as Sarita has mentioned, the data that is collected or generated belongs to Stellenbosch University. But still, the university acknowledges that research data transfer agreements are needed when a researcher wants to transfer data from one institution to another or one platform to another. So that is why the regulation encourages that researchers, they need to make use of the transfer agreement That is accessible if ever you need any information regarding that. Researchers are more than welcome to contact the contracts office in the DRD. Where data acquisition is concerned also, at the university actually recommends that researchers should try to use storage platforms that are supported by the university. And also when researchers are applying for their ethics application, such information, if ever you want to use a different platform that is not supported by the institution, this might be a stumbling block in your application. But the university recommends that if ever you are going to store your data, you should always try to use platforms that are supported by the institution. And also, where researchers share their data, the RDM regulation encourages that data transfer agreements may be used if ever you wish to share your data. And also, when it comes to the publication of your data sets, we always encourage that maybe you can use the Sun Scholar data platform, whereby you can share your research data after your research has been completed. And also, if ever you, as I've mentioned on my previous slide, the DRD always assist when it comes to the data transfer agreements. When dealing with research data, we try to promote open access of research data after a research project is completed. But at the same breath, the university understands that some research data needs to be made as open as and accessible as possible, but as close as necessary, because there are certain instances where data cannot be made open or accessible due to sensitivity or data privacy or intellectual property issues. So as much as we promote open access, but we are cognizant of the fact that in some instances, that the research data cannot be made public due to such. And as you can see here on the slide, we talk about the data sharing and publication. As you can see on the workflow, the Sun Scholar is at the end, whereby when you are completed with your research, you can always publish your data sets on the Sun Scholar platform. And whatever each and every data that is published on the Sun Scholar data platform, it undergoes a thorough curation process whereby different stakeholders review the data sets that you upload to ensure the integrity of the platform and also of the data sets that are published on the Sun Scholar data. Another issue that is addressed by the regulation, as I've mentioned here, when you have to access your research data, there's, as I've mentioned, the degree of openness. So we do look at such things. And also where it comes to data retention, Sun Scholar, basically, we try to preserve the data set as long as possible. So we try our utmost best to make sure that whatever data that is published on Sun Scholar is preserved. Another issue that is addressed by the regulation is the ethical consideration that researcher needs to take into account. The RDM regulation does not try to replace the standard operating procedures that are associated with the University Research Ethics Committee, but the RDM regulation wants to cover the gaps that are not clearly covered by this by looking on issues that involve RDM. By saying this, the researchers will still need to go through the University Research Ethics Committee for Ethics application. If you are working with sensitive data as a researcher that will collect from human participants, the regulation advises that researchers will need to make use of the University Private Impact Assessment, as Sarita has alluded before. This tool is managed by the University Division for Information Governance. It generates reports that assign risk ratings to the research data. it actually informs the researcher if the data is low a risk or medium risk or high risk in nature. So it is very important, and we always encourage the researchers to take this so that they can ascertain the nature of the data that they are going to collect, whether it falls on high risk or low risk before they can submit their ethical applications. If researchers are collecting secondary data that is sensitive in nature, the researchers should make use of data transfer agreements. Once again, the researcher will need to contact the DRD, the Contracts Office, for further assistance regarding to this. The RDM regulation does not unpack the legal requirements in great detail because the actual laws already exist. The relevant laws that apply to the regulations include intellectual property. As we have mentioned on the previous slide, the data that has been generated at Stellenbosch University belongs to the institution, but data transfer agreements will need to be done if ever data is moved from one platform to another or one institution to another. And we encourage our researchers once again to contact the DRD in that regard. Secondly, we talk about the data privacy. The data privacy basically includes POPIA. As we all know, in 2020, July, POPIA was passed, and the objective of the POPIA defines what personal data is and prescribes duties for the controllers and processors. And also, when it comes to access to information, we try to, as an institution that is research intensive, we try to make sure that our research data is open as possible. But the openness of the information, we've tried to put it on the Sun Scholar because the Sun Scholar is an open source platform whereby people who are not associated with the Stellenbosch University can still have access on the data if ever the researcher chooses to make that data open to them without having to have SU credentials. As you know, we have the research contracts, and we always advise the researchers to contact them if ever they are in doubt. Where data regarding the transfer of the data, the sensitivity of the data, they can also contact them. Within the research contracts, there are types of research contracts, as you can see on the slide. So if ever you are in doubt, you need to consult the one that will be relevant to your research. Uh, that was my last slide. I will hand over to Hilda for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Clabiso. Hello, colleagues. My name is Hilda, and I'm a member of the Research IT team. So my colleagues mentioned that there are a number of responsibilities on researchers when it comes to research data management. What we realize is that it is near impossible for researchers to comply with the regulation if they do not have the necessary tools and support services to do so. So what we are working on, and when I say we, it's the whole research data management advisory team, is to create what we call the SU Research ICT Commons. So it is a collection of tools, of services, whether it's infrastructure or software or applications, that will support the requirements of the majority of our researchers. So there are certain researchers who have highly specialized needs, maybe for very large data sets, and those requirements fall outside of the commons. We call those specialisms. So what is in the commons, the university tries as far as possible to make available for free to our researchers, but then we also follow the good practice that other higher education institutions follow, and we say there's a fair use policy that applies to the commons. So there is a certain amount of storage space that our researchers are entitled to for free. But then if you go beyond that fair use allocation, then there will be a cost involved. So part of the commons is the institutional part of what we call the research ICT toolbox. And again, this distinction between the institutional solutions that are in the commons, and we say that those are the tools that are used by all researchers or most researchers across faculties and across subject matter disciplines. And then we have our specialisms that are those tools that are used by specific researchers or specific research groups and that are highly subject matter specific. So because of the size of the core research IT group, we are only 3 people. Our focus is on those tools that are within the commons, the institutional tools, but then on a best effort basis, we also try to support research groups and individual researchers when it comes to the tools that they use for research data management. And here you'll see, for example, that the tools that are within the commons that are used across faculties are things like the research contract solution, the ethics solution, and then tools like RedCap that are used across faculties by very many of our researchers. Some of the specialisms are also listed in the outer band of this diagram. And then maybe also to mention that our focus is not only on providing applications and on providing infrastructure, but also providing services. So it's very important, for example, that when a research group identifies the need for an IT application, that at the outset, they make sure that this tool will fit into the institutional ICT ecology so that we don't introduce any tools that introduces risk for the whole institution. So we also provide services whereby we help research groups to unpack their requirements and document their requirements. We're happy to advise during the procurement process. And then we also have certain architecture guidelines that we can give research groups so that they make sure that the tools that they procure are secure, meets their functional requirements, and fits into the Stellenbosch University architecture. Then both my colleagues mentioned the privacy impact self-assessment, and the reason why it's so important to understand the risk classification of your data is because that will determine which of the tools in the ICT toolbox you should choose. So if you are working with high-risk data, as an example, then your data collection tool will be RedCap, which is cleared for high-risk data rather than something like Sun Scholar data, Sun Surveys, which is cleared for medium-risk data, or the institutional instance of Microsoft Forms, which may only be used for low or minimal risk data. So it's only when you've done the privacy impact self-assessment and you know what your data classification is that you can identify the fit for purpose tools. Then just to highlight one or two of the tools in our commons that we find meets the needs of the majority of our researchers, so not those with the highly specialized need. And we find that our Microsoft 365 toolkit that includes things like OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint is very valuable for very many of our researchers. And I've given the link to the online version there, portal.office.com. But then for the tools, you can also install the desktop applications. What's very important is the idea of a tenant. So it's not the Microsoft resources you get access to when you create a personal account for free by signing up with Microsoft. When you log in, you'll see there's the option to sign into your personal account or into your work or school account. When it comes to institutional data, you should also always choose the work or school account because that is the part of the Microsoft cloud that the university gets by virtue of our institutional agreement with Microsoft and that we pay dearly for. But it is also the part of the Microsoft cloud where we've configured specific security controls and we know what those controls are, and we can vouch for the research data that are stored within the institutional tenant part of the Microsoft platform. Then we also mentioned RedCap as one of the core tools in our ICT Commons, our Stellenbosch University ICT Commons. And this is a very powerful tool for creating surveys and databases. Again, we've implemented security controls that makes it suitable for high-risk data. And when funders or contract partners ask what the security controls are, we can clearly articulate these. Then when it comes to analyzing data, there are a number of software packages that the university has institutional agreements for, and those you can access by way of the Stellenbosch University Software Hub, and I've included the link for you. Then if you have specific requirements around research data management and you don't know where to start, we've created a bespoke research ICT service desk that you are more than welcome to access. Members of the Library and Information Service, of the DRD, of our high performance computing service, of information governance, they are all what we call agents on this service desk. So we can point your request at the right specialist, or we can work together as the RDM advisory group to try and guide you as best we can. Then we've also created an online ICT for research toolbox, and this is a work in progress where we list all of the tools that I had in that initial diagram with links to the relevant tools. So this is also a useful portal just to show you what is available and to guide you to the appropriate tools. Then the reason why we encourage you to use institutional tools where possible rather than tools that are out there available for free, for example, like SurveyMonkey or personal storage solutions, is because very often our researchers are asked to complete what's sometimes called minimal technical and organizational security safeguards checklists. We just call them security checklists, where they have to state how are their data secured and how is it made sustainable so that if they suddenly leave the university still has access to that data. That's one of the key reasons why we encourage researchers to use institutional tools and why it's written that way in the RDM regulations. The other reason is also when you apply for ethics clearance, then it will be much easier if you use institutional tools that's already been vetted and cleared. If you choose to use something that falls outside of the university's toolkit, there's a kind of sub-process to get permission to use a non-institutional tool, and this just adds to the length of that process. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Peter to just quickly talk you through why information security is so important and what some of the standards are that we follow.
Thank you, Hilda. If you can maybe just go to the next slide, Hilda, that will be appreciated.
Oh, sorry, Peter, I stopped sharing, but I'll just
Thank you.
start again.
So presenter mode and then slide number 40, please.
There we go.
Thank you so much. So if we look at our funders and the requirements, one of the key elements that comes out is frameworks, specifically security frameworks in how we need to protect the data. So we evaluated the frameworks and took that in comparison with our IT guidelines and what type of frameworks they make use of. So one of the frameworks and the models that came up was the CIA triad model. So that is one of the things we look at, and that focuses on the confidentiality of data and also the management thereof. It also looks at the protection of the specific information and then also the access controls related to the management of the data and the data itself. Part of the CIA triad was the integrity, and that focuses on the integrity of the data itself, specifically the software protection, and then also continuity plans, which is very important at the end of the day. These type of measurements prevent the unauthorized access of data, and then also data loss in certain cases. And then, of course, most importantly, the tempering of software or the data. So we want to keep the data as trustworthy as possible, hence the integrity needs to be adhered to. Then also the availability of data focuses on the access control and then also the continuity plan related to the data. So that will form part of the security model. That model ties into what we call a security framework. So there's a lot of frameworks out there. There's the GDPR, OPIA, NIST, ISO 27000 series. But what we did is we took one framework and tried to base everything on this specific framework. The framework we selected was the NIST framework. There is a new version that came out, version 2.0, and we're working on implementing that currently. But this current model is focusing on the previous version of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and it focused more on the identification, the protection, the detection, and then also response and the recovery of what you need to do in a security incident. So you will see there's certain key enablers and then also business opportunities. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I just want to touch base on each of that factors or functions, as we call it. So the identification or identify focus on the identification of data and also what type of data it is at the end of the day. Is it sensitive? Or not? Is it low risk, high risk data? So the identification part help with that. Then we also focus on the protection of the specific data. So this can be on a level of access, so authorization, and then also the software that you make use of to access the data or extract the data at the end of the day. Then we look at the detection phase. This specific function focuses on the continuality of data recovery, the process that goes with that, and then also helps with breaches in case there is, and then also the data loss functionality that it comes with. Then we look at the response. So that focuses on the response functionality, that if something happens, what do you need to do? What's the steps you need to follow if there is an incident? Then the recovery period or function is what we refer to as the end of the cycle. And this focuses on the data backup and then also the recovery of that specific backups in case an incident occurs. It's a very crucial step, and it's not something that a lot of researchers think about, but it's usually part of the functionality or the questionnaire that the funders want. They want to know, how are you going to protect your data? Next slide, please. So what we did was, over a course of a few years, we compiled a list of functions and requirements that these specific funders want. So we compiled the list, and out of that list, we compiled this specific word cloud. And this word cloud highlights what they need most, or what comes across the most within the requirements of the funders. So I'm going to touch base on certain of these aspects. So one of that will be your data management plan. And that's focused on the collection of the data. How you're going to store it, how you're going to organize it, keep it secure, and then also the sharing factor regarding data. Then we have the continuity plan that focus on the data, the backup of the data, and then also the recovery of the data. And in some cases, it also focuses on hardware. So if you have hardware, how is that in line with your continuity plan? Then we have the information protection that focuses on the safeguarding of the sensitive information, like your patient information, and then also the confidentiality measures that you put in place for the data. Then authentication comes up. So how are you going to implement authentication and then prevent unauthorized access to your data, to your software, and to your service as well, if you go that specific route? Then there's the software protection that focuses on the software itself, and once again ensuring that integrity is part of your software package. Then it's the access control, and that's once again speaks to things like authorization, your MFA, multi-factor authentication, that they need in place to order your or to access your data. Next slide, please. So we took all of that information, based it on the framework that I spoke about. That will be your NIST cybersecurity framework with your model of the CIA. And we compiled the word cloud and extracted the information to see how does it fit in, what do they need most, and where do they focus on. And from this slide, you can see they focus more on the fact that you need to protect, and then you also have the capability to detect. That was the important part that they focused on. So that is what we basically took out of it, and we tried to make the most of how we implement software, how we implement specific data management plans in accordance to what the funder wants. And that focuses from a security perspective on the protection of data, software and hardware, and then also the detection. We will touch base on the detection. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is one of our examples that we made use of. It's RedCap. And how we protected this specific service was that we implemented MFA. So that touches base with your authentication and authorization. We have a certain ecology, and that will be within the Stellenbosch University where we have a data center. These servers are virtualized, so we have the capability of failover. So what that basically means is we have multiple servers and then also multiple databases that split from one another. And if one server decides to fail for some other reason, there will be a new and a different server that can start up instantaneously without you knowing, and the system will work as if nothing ever happened. Then we also focuses on the best practices. So that's implementing the models and implementing the certain frameworks to adhere to that specific standards. And one other thing was the vulnerability management. We focus a lot on this specific program because it is crucial that we focus on it due to the fact that vulnerabilities gets released on a continuous basis. So we will detect the vulnerabilities, and from there we will try to mitigate these specific vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities focuses on operating systems, third-party software, and then also the specific software that you will make use of. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in order to manage the specific vulnerabilities, we focuses on the framework that is the vulnerability management cycle. The specific cycle tries also to tie the two together. So that will be vulnerability management and then also your data management. So this will be a combination of both, where your vulnerability management focuses on identifying and prioritizing the weaknesses within the systems. And when it comes to your data, it's trying and finding a way to secure that specific data and then also control the access to the data at the end of the day. The common goal or the shared goal between the two is that the vulnerability management system and the research data management process aligns in the sense that it will protect your assets and then also your data, and it will make the whole ecology and your environment more secure at the end of the day. I'm going to touch a little bit based on the cycle itself, just to give you an idea what will happen. So firstly, we will try to proactively search for vulnerabilities, what we call a vulnerability scan. So we will launch a scan on your servers or your server at the end of the day. And this scan will then do authentication against the software or your server, and it will do a scan. So this is a proactive scan just to collect information. Once we have the information, it will take this information and it will look into its database to see what is there that should not be there. So in certain cases, you have underlying software that's on the system. You are unaware of the software, but it has never been updated in 3 years. And now there's a specific vulnerability. So it will highlight all of these types of vulnerabilities for us. And then in the same sense, it will take it and prioritize it to certain tiers. So the specific tiers will be critical, high, medium, and low. So our focus, of course, will be on the critical and high and try to mitigate that. And that will form part of your remediation period. And then we will focus on the medium and the low afterwards, and then compile reporting and just to verify that if we launch the remediation, is that sufficient? Does it mitigate the scenario where the vulnerability was there and now it should not be there? So there will be a cycle of reports and just to verify what needs to happen next. Are you going to accept the risk? Are we going to transfer the risk? So we look at that, and the whole cycle then plays out where you need to do another scan just basically to verify and if the vulnerability is mitigated. So the benefits of this is to minimize damage in case there is an attack on your specific service or service, and then also your data. And then it also reduces the attack surface of your ecology. So overall, the creation of the management cycle with the frameworks and the models, it's there to secure your environment. And then it plays a big part without you knowing it. And this is one of the services that we offer, and that a lot of researchers make use of. And it's also it's very shocking at the end of the day if you see the results after a scan. So this is me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, colleagues, for an insightful presentation. I have not received any questions in the chat. I'm just going to give it a few seconds to see if anyone wants to raise their hand. Perhaps one of our colleagues wants to ask a question live. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Okay. I'm glad that you benefited from that, Dr. Blinner. Maybe if I can use my moderator privilege to ask, and I think this may be a question, Sarita, if you're still, oh yeah, I see that you're still there. You mentioned in your presentation that the PI is ultimately responsible for data management, for research data management. Could you perhaps explain to us how that responsibility or relationship works in the case for student research, whether it be honors, masters, or PhD?
Thank you, Clarissa, for that question. Yes, we must always remember that the supervisor will be the principal investigator, and the student will obviously then have to submit the data management plan to the supervisor of the environment or of the project. So there will always be that type of hierarchy in the responsibilities as well. So of course the student will be responsible for the data collection and all the processes that are involved in the research cycle. But I think in the event of something happening, or if there are questions, that will be the supervisor together with the student. So in the end, there's always a principal investigator involved in a study, that will have a guiding role for the students in the environment, and that is how I actually understand it as well. So the student will be involved for their own with the data management of their own projects, but they will report to their supervisors in that case. I don't know if any of the other colleagues have something more to say about that.
Hilda, Peter, Fabiso? Okay. It seems that you've answered it very well, Sarita. Thank you so much for that advice, because we often get this in the research ethics application form. Where generally the student is the one who is preparing and submitting the ethics application. Sometimes there are questions about, in terms of research data management, who is ultimately responsible. I also have a question then for our ICT team, research ICT team, in terms of if researchers, because colleagues, you would have heard in their presentation that when you are collecting human research or personal information, it is advised that you conduct the privacy impact self-assessment. And that privacy impact self-assessment would give you a privacy risk classification, which would guide you in choosing the appropriate data management or data collection solution. Hilda, could you perhaps advise our colleagues where they may find this information or guidance that would help them prepare their research and application, ethics applications or governance applications accordingly?
Clarissa, the link to the privacy impact self-assessment.
No, I'm speaking about the data management solution, data management and solutions that are on offer from Stellenbosch universities. Yes,
I
yes,
hear you.
yeah.
So there are maybe two aspects to that. The one is the available tools, and those they will find in the toolkit, and we'll share the link. But I know also in your ethics application form, you have the list of acceptable tools when it comes to data collection and storage. So that will guide them as to which ones gets the stamp of approval from the university. But maybe also just related to that is what happens if they choose a tool that's not within the recommended university list. So say, for example, they want to use SurveyMonkey, then that must come with a motivation to the Research Data Management Advisory Group. And what we will do is we will look at whether the tool that the researcher motivates for has any functionality that is not included in one of our institutional tools. So that would be a strong motivation, something like Qualtrics, for example, that has inbuilt analysis capabilities that our existing tools do not have. And then we also look at the risk classification of the data. And those are two of the primary factors that we consider. But very often we find that researchers say that our institutional tools do not have the functionality they need. But if they go and dig a little bit deeper, they find that it actually does meet their requirements. And it then just makes life so much easier because it then has the necessary security controls that are required.
Thank you, Hilda. I think what I'm hearing you say is that in this case the guidelines, the guides are available. The privacy impact assessment tool helps you determine the privacy risk level, and once you have that privacy risk level, it then guides you in terms of what the appropriate solution may be. And if there is a solution that is not yet vetted or part of the SU, what do you call it, Hilda? The ICT
The
toolbox.
institutional
No,
toolbox, yes.
it's not part of the institutional toolbox. That it is wise to get prior advice from the research data management advisory team, and with motivation, to determine whether whether the tool that you choose to use or that is required of you to use is secure and appropriate. I have a question here, and I think, Babiso, this might be one for you, and this comes from Dr. Prinnout, which is question regarding the library archive for publications. I have a paper under review and would like to upload data to obtain a repository link for the publication. Should it be accepted? How do I go about this, and what type of data can be uploaded?
Thank you, Clarissa, for that question. Basically, to answer the question, I would say you will have to submit the data that is related to the paper that you are about to publish. And if ever they need a link to access your data, the platform allows you to reserve a DOI or create a private link that you will be able to share with the reviewers of the journal that you are going to publish in. So the type of data that that you need to publish on Sun Scholar data, as I've said, is the data that is related to the paper that you're about to publish. And yeah, and the platform is not as specific, or does not say just because maybe, let's say, you've done a qualitative research and you have transcripts. It does not dictate the file format, but we always advise, if whatever file format that you are using, that will be a file format that will enable reuse of data sets once the publication has been done.
Thank you, Claviso. Dr. Nutt, I hope that answers your question. Oh, there we go. There's a thank you for you. Okay, so colleagues, so do you have any other questions for the research data management team? And any question, there is no such thing as a silly question. It's what I always say. I learn new things every time I engage with my colleagues from our research data advisory group. There's always new tools, solutions to consider, and new appropriate ways of managing our data responsibly. But I think if there aren't any questions, or there's no questions posted in the chat, we may close the session. I wonder, colleagues from our data management team, would you like to end off perhaps with a tip? Perhaps each one of you, Sarita, Hilda, Peter, Babiso, if there is maybe just a key tip that you would like to share with our researchers that they must keep in mind in terms of data management.
Thanks,
Start with
Clarissa.
Sarita. Go ahead, Sarita.
Thanks. Now, I think one of the most important things here would be the data management plan that must be done before the project starts. So in your data, in your research planning phase, and that is where all research projects start, this is one of the core things that must be considered, so that you can look at the costs as well and include that in the budget, because we often see people that did not include it in the budget, and they only realize halfway through the project they actually need specific tools or specific hardware, and then they don't have the funding for that, and it's not always available. So that is very important, and to make sure that you know what your funder the external funder requirements are. So there's lots of support for people to know exactly what to do and how to do it before they even start the project. So please make use of all the tools and the services that are available, and attend the training sessions like this information session as well. Yeah, and then if in doubt, rather ask first than go ahead and miss out on something or do something that you have to fix later on. So I think that's a very important thing that I would like to focus the researchers to focus on.
That's a great take-home message, Sarita. I think it's important for colleagues to know that we are all trying to, and I think that's something that you and Hilda mentioned, Sarita, we're all trying to work together to ensure that we as Stellenbosch University, that we use research data responsibly. Hilda, Babiso, Peter, anything that you would like to add, or has Sarita covered it? Oh, Babiso, please go ahead.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Clarissa. One thing that I would like to share with the researchers is to always try to explore the available tools that are supported by the institution that can eliminate any unnecessary delays, maybe on your research or on your ethics application. Because as Hilda mentioned, those tools have been vetted already. So if ever you are not sure about the capabilities of those tools, Sarita said, you need to ask. Maybe what you are looking for can be resolved by the tools that we have. That's it on my side. Thank you, Clarissa.
Thank you, Kaviso. I think Hilda, Peter, is there something you would like to say about the tools and security they are?
I can maybe add that the researchers should advise the support from IT from the start of their project, because we find that in the past that they usually include IT at the end of the whole process. And then it takes a while just to implement everything and get everything in place. So rather consult IT at the beginning of your project, and then also the underestimate of time. So when we look at the security factors, just to get through this whole process, it does take quite a while to complete. And if there is any vulnerabilities in the mitigation of that vulnerabilities, that also takes a while to address. Then regarding that process, it's also advised to come in at the beginning of the project and not at the end of the project, because if there's vulnerabilities and we need to say upgrade an operating system, it might influence the application if you decide to go with your own application. And in certain cases, maybe if you want to upgrade the database, it might influence your data itself. So just be cautious of that and plan your time accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Hilda, please
Larissa,
go ahead.
if I may.
Yes.
To tie in with what my colleagues said, I think this maybe speaks more to research groups than individual researchers, but often vendors will promote specific tools and it looks fabulous, the functionality, so what it can do. But there are multiple levels to a system, and IT looks through a different lens. So we'll look at the back end of the solution, the security aspects, how well it integrates, what are the encryption options. So even if you think that that specific piece of software is exactly what you need, you're only looking at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to research data management. So feel free to loop us in so that we just look at the hidden things about systems that you would not necessarily consider. And way before you spend time on a solution, we sometimes find that research groups buy tools and then they can't use them because the security controls are simply lacking. The other thing also for research groups is to think very mindfully about your whole data pipeline. We find that often researchers think they know how they will share the data with their external collaborators, for example. And when we say, okay, let's quickly do a data flow diagram, they realize that between them and their research collaborators, they actually have no idea how the data will get from the collaborator securely to the IT researcher, or how the IT researcher will make available data to their collaborators. So to really make sure you understand exactly, if you store data in one place, how will you give your collaborators access securely? And again, if you come to us early enough, we can help you think through that process and the tools that are available and the things you should be careful about.
Thank you, Hilda. Thank you, colleagues. I think this is such great advice, especially in preparation of it. Still early in the year. Even if you haven't yet consulted with our colleagues, please make the effort to reach out to them if you just want to check that your data management plan is well thought through. Colleagues, I'm going to end the session here. Thank you so much for your time and for your presentations. Colleagues, as I mentioned in the chat, the slides and the recording will be shared with you sometime after the session. Thank you so much for your time with us, and thank you for being part of this community that tries to foster responsible research practice. Thank you, colleagues. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Clarissa. Thanks, colleagues.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.